Have you ever noticed how exhausted you can become even when nothing is physically happening? You may be sitting in a quiet room, lying in bed at night, or driving along a familiar road, and yet inside you there is a conversation that never seems to end. One thought reminds you of what happened yesterday, another worries about tomorrow, another wonders what someone thinks of you, another returns to something you wish you had said differently. Your body may be still, but your mind is traveling in 100 directions. And perhaps the deepest exhaustion in your life is not coming from everything you have to do. Perhaps some of it comes from everything you are carrying inside your mind. There is a kind of silence that has nothing to do with the absence of sound. You can be surrounded by people and still touch it. You can hear traffic outside your window and still know it. You can move through an uncertain season of your life and still feel it somewhere beneath the uncertainty. This silence is not created when the world finally behaves the way you want it to behave. It is discovered when you stop allowing the world to decide what must happen inside you. You may have spent years believing that peace will arrive when something changes, when the relationship becomes easier, when someone finally understands you, when the future becomes certain, when the person who hurt you apologizes, when you know exactly what your purpose is, when your family stops worrying you, when your body feels younger, when life gives you some evidence that everything is going to be all right. But notice what happens when peace is always attached to a condition. You keep postponing it. You tell yourself, I will be peaceful when this is resolved. And then something else appears. Life has a remarkable way of refusing to become permanently quiet for us. One problem disappears and another question arrives. One season ends and another begins. People change. Bodies age. Relationships evolve. Plans fail. Doors close. Unexpected doors open. The river keeps moving whether you understand where it is going or not. So perhaps the invitation is not to wait for the river to stop. Perhaps the invitation is to discover the stillness beneath the river. There is something within you that has been present through every chapter of your life. It was there before you learned what other people expected from you. It was there before you began comparing yourself with others. It was there before someone disappointed you, before you disappointed yourself, before you collected all the labels that now seem to describe who you are. You may call it awareness. You may call it spirit. You may experience it as love, presence, consciousness, or your connection with the source. The name is less important than the experience. It is the quiet part of you that can notice your thoughts without becoming them. Imagine the sky on a stormy afternoon. Clouds gather. Thunder moves across the horizon. Rain begins to fall. If you were looking only at the clouds, you might believe the entire sky had become dark. But the clouds are not the sky. They are simply passing through it. Your thoughts are often like those clouds. Fear passes through. Judgment passes through. Regret passes through. Anger passes through. The memory of someone who hurt you passes through. The fear of losing someone you love passes through. And because these experiences can feel so intense, you begin calling them me. You say, I am anxious. I am angry. I am lost. I am afraid. But what if there is a quieter way of seeing this? What if anxiety is something you are noticing rather than something you are? What if fear is a cloud moving through awareness? What if the part of you capable of observing the storm is already larger than the storm itself? This is where silence begins to become sacred. Not because silence magically removes every difficult emotion, but because it gives you enough space to see what you have been identifying with. At first, this can feel uncomfortable. Many people discover that when the television is turned off, the phone is put down, the conversation ends, and there is nowhere else for attention to go. Old feelings begin to rise. A memory appears. A regret returns. An unresolved conversation starts playing again. You remember someone you have not forgiven. You remember something for which you have not forgiven yourself. And so you reach for noise again, not because you love noise, but because noise can protect you from meeting yourself. Yet what rises in silence may not be coming to disturb you. Perhaps it is coming because it is finally being given enough space to be seen. A garden cannot release what is buried beneath the soil until the earth is opened. In the same way, your inner life sometimes reveals what you have hidden when you finally become still enough to notice it. You do not have to judge what appears. You do not have to immediately repair it. You do not even have to understand it. You can simply notice there is fear here. There is sadness here. There is resentment here. There is a part of me that still wants approval. There is a part of me that still wants yesterday to have been different. And then, very gently, you may begin to ask a different question. Who is noticing all of this? That question can change the quality of silence, because suddenly you are no longer trapped inside every thought. You are witnessing thought. You are no longer fighting every emotion. You are allowing emotion to move through the larger space of awareness. The ocean does not become frightened by one wave. It allows the wave to rise, move, and return. Perhaps you can begin relating to your inner world in the same way. You do not need to defeat your mind to find peace. You do not need to force yourself to stop thinking. You do not need to become some perfectly calm spiritual person who is never hurt, never afraid, and never uncertain. You are simply being invited to remember that beneath all those movements is something that does not need to struggle. Something quiet, something loving, something that has never left you. And perhaps this is why silence can feel so strangely familiar when you finally allow yourself to enter it. You are not traveling towards something foreign. You are returning to something ancient within yourself. For a few moments, there is nothing to prove, no one to impress, no past to rewrite, no future to control. There is only this breath, this moment, and the awareness that you are here. And when you remain there long enough, you may begin to discover something surprising. The silence you were avoiding was never empty. It was waiting for you. And what you begin hearing there may not be another voice telling you what to do. It may be something much quieter. The recognition that beneath all the fear, judgment, resentment, striving, and uncertainty, there is a peaceful presence that has been with you all along. The question is not whether that presence exists. The deeper question is what happens when you become quiet enough to remember it. When you begin to become quiet enough to notice that peaceful presence within you, something else becomes visible as well. You begin to see how much of your inner noise has been created by the part of you that is always trying to protect an identity. It wants to know where you stand, what others think of you, what will happen tomorrow, whether you are doing enough, whether you are loved enough, whether you are safe enough. This is the movement of the ego, and it does not need to be treated as an enemy. It only needs to be seen. The ego is often frightened by silence because silence removes many of the things it uses to define you. In silence, there is no audience to impress. There is no argument to win. There is no comparison to maintain. There is no one standing beside you whose life can be measured against your own. There is simply you, breathing, observing, being. And for a mind that has spent years building an identity from the outside world, simply being can feel strangely threatening. Think about how often your peace becomes dependent on another person's behavior. Someone does not return your message, and immediately the mind begins creating explanations. Perhaps they are upset with you. Perhaps you said something wrong. Perhaps you are no longer important to them. Within minutes, a small silence from another person has become an entire emotional story inside you. Yet nothing may have actually happened. This is one of the ego's habits. It fills empty spaces with fear. It does not like uncertainty, so it invents certainty. And unfortunately, the certainty it invents is often painful. Silence gives you the opportunity to notice this before you believe it. You can feel the thought arising and quietly recognize, my mind is creating a story. That simple awareness creates space. You do not have to condemn the story. You do not have to argue with it. You do not have to prove it wrong. You simply become aware that a thought has appeared and that you are the one witnessing it. Imagine sitting beside a river and watching leaves float downstream. You would not jump into the water after every leaf. You would allow one to appear, pass in front of you, and disappear around the bend. Yet with thoughts, we often do the opposite. Every thought seems to demand that we follow it. A fearful thought appears, and we follow it. A memory appears, and we follow it. Someone's criticism appears in our mind, and we follow it. Soon we are miles away from the present moment, carried downstream by something that began as a single thought. Silence teaches you that you do not have to follow every leaf. You can remain on the riverbank. This becomes especially powerful when fear enters your life. Fear often speaks as though it knows the future. It says, what if this relationship ends? What if I become ill? What if I lose what I have? What if I never find what I am searching for? What if I make the wrong choice? Notice how rarely fear speaks about this moment. It usually needs tomorrow. Right now, perhaps you are sitting somewhere safe enough to hear these words. You are breathing. Life is moving through you. But the mind can leave this moment and travel into an imaginary future where something terrible has already happened. The body often responds as though that imagined future were happening now. Your heart tightens, your breathing changes, your shoulders become tense. You begin suffering from an event that exists only as a possibility. This does not mean that practical concerns should be ignored. Wisdom can prepare, love can act, awareness can make thoughtful decisions. But there is a difference between responding to life and repeatedly suffering from imagined versions of life. Silence helps you feel that difference. When fear appears, you can ask yourself gently, what is actually happening right now? Not next month, not next year, not in the story your mind has created, right now. Often you will discover that this moment is much more peaceful than the future you have been rehearsing. The ego also creates noise through control. It has an image of how life should unfold. People should behave in certain ways. Relationships should last in certain forms. Children should make certain choices. Careers should follow certain paths. Bodies should remain strong. Plans should happen on schedule. Then life arrives with its own movement. And suffering begins in the distance between what is happening and what you insist should be happening. You may know this feeling from relationships. Perhaps you love someone deeply, but you also carry an invisible script for how that person should love you. They should understand your needs without being told. They should respond the way you would respond. They should recognize everything you have done for them. They should become the person you believe they could be. When they do not follow the script, resentment begins. The mind starts keeping records. I was there for you. You never notice what I do. After everything I have given you, these thoughts may contain genuine pain, and your feelings deserve compassion. Silence is not asking you to tolerate mistreatment or abandon healthy boundaries. It is asking something more subtle. Can you notice how much additional suffering comes from demanding that another human being become the person your mind has decided they should be? Love and control can look similar from a distance, but inside they feel very different. Control says, I will be peaceful when you change. Love says, I will meet you as clearly as I can without abandoning the peace within myself. This does not mean remaining in every relationship. Sometimes love creates closeness. Sometimes love creates distance. Sometimes the most peaceful response is a boundary. Sometimes it is goodbye. But when your decision comes from inner silence rather than wounded reaction, it carries a different energy. You are not trying to punish someone. You are listening to what feels aligned with truth, dignity, and love. The ego also becomes noisy through comparison. You see someone who seems happier, younger, more confident, more spiritually evolved, more loved, or more certain about their direction. Almost instantly, the mind begins measuring. Why am I not there yet? What is wrong with me? Why did their life unfold that way while mine unfolded this way? Comparison takes the unique movement of your life and tries to place it on someone else's calendar. But look at nature. A rose does not become ashamed because the oak tree is taller. The moon does not apologize because it does not shine like the sun. A tree in winter does not look toward a tree in summer and conclude that it has failed. Each is participating in its own season. Perhaps your life is doing the same. There may be seasons when everything appears to be opening. There may be seasons when things fall away. There may be periods when you feel deeply connected to your purpose and periods when you have no idea what comes next. The ego labels one season success and another failure. Awareness simply notices the season. And silence reminds you that you do not have to turn every season into a judgment about yourself. This is particularly important as you grow older. The world may encourage you to measure your life by what you have accumulated, accomplished, maintained, or lost. The ego may begin comparing who you are now with who you once were. Perhaps your body has changed. Perhaps certain dreams did not unfold. Perhaps people you expected to grow old beside you are no longer here. Perhaps your children no longer need you in the way they once did. Perhaps the face in the mirror carries years that your inner self does not feel. Silence can become a place where aging stops being an argument with time. You begin to see that life has never asked you to remain physically unchanged. Everything in nature changes form. Leaves emerge and fall. Rivers reshape their banks. Seasons turn. Bodies transform. Yet there is something within you that has been witnessing all these changes. The child you once were, the young person you became, the adult who struggled and loved and lost and learned, all of them were experienced through the same mysterious awareness that is noticing this moment now. Your form has changed. Your roles have changed. Your beliefs may have changed, but the awareness beneath those identities has remained quietly present. And when you touch that awareness, even briefly, aging can begin to feel less like losing yourself and more like releasing identities you no longer need. Another identity the ego holds tightly is the wounded self. Someone betrayed you, someone abandoned you, someone spoke words that remained in your mind for years. Perhaps a parent could not give you the love you needed. Perhaps a relationship ended in a way you never understood. Perhaps you were judged unfairly. Pain happened. Silence does not deny that. Spiritual awareness is not pretending that painful experiences were painless. It is not covering wounds with pleasant ideas. It is allowing yourself to feel what happened without making what happened, the permanent definition of who you are. There is a profound difference between saying I was hurt and saying I am the person who was hurt. One describes an experience. The other creates an identity. The ego can carry an old wound for decades because the wound has become part of the story it tells about itself. And sometimes letting go feels frightening because you wonder who you will be without that story. If you stop being angry at the person who betrayed you, does that mean what they did was acceptable? If you stop replaying the injustice, does that mean it did not matter? If you release the resentment, have they somehow won? These are understandable questions. But perhaps forgiveness has never been about giving victory to someone else. Perhaps forgiveness is the moment you decide that what happened in the past will no longer be given permission to occupy your present. Imagine carrying a heavy stone everywhere you go because someone handed it to you years ago. You carry it into new relationships. You place it beside your bed at night. You take it with you on beautiful days. You hold it while trying to embrace people who never gave it to you. Eventually, you may realize that putting down the stone does not erase the person who gave it to you. It simply frees your hands. Silence shows you what you are still carrying. And it does so without accusation. It simply creates enough space for you to notice. There is another form of noise that is often more difficult to recognize because it can disguise itself as kindness, people-pleasing. You may have learned very early that harmony meant keeping everyone else happy. You learned to say yes when your heart whispered no. You learned to hide your needs so that no one would be disappointed. You learned to read the room before listening to yourself. Eventually, the voices of other people become so loud inside you that you cannot tell which voice is yours. What will they think? Will they be disappointed? Will they still love me? Will they think I am selfish? Silence allows these questions to settle long enough for another one to appear. What feels true for me? This is not selfishness, it is awareness. You cannot live lovingly while being permanently separated from your own inner truth. When your yes comes from fear, resentment often follows. When your yes comes from love, there is freedom in it. When your no comes from anger, it may create another wound. When your no comes from clarity, it can become an act of peace. The difference is difficult to hear when the mind is crowded. This is why silence matters. It helps you distinguish reaction from intention. The ego reacts quickly. It wants to defend itself immediately. Someone criticizes you, and you feel the urge to explain. Someone misunderstands you, and you want to correct their perception. Someone says something hurtful, and your mind begins preparing the perfect response. But what happens when you do not answer immediately? What happens when you allow a little silence between what happened and what you do next? In that small space, something extraordinary becomes possible. Choice. You may still respond. You may still speak clearly. You may still protect a boundary. But now the response does not have to come from the wound that was just touched. It can come from awareness. And this is one of the quiet ways your life begins to change. Not because the world stops challenging you, but because fewer challenges are allowed to take possession of your inner state. You begin to understand that peace is not passivity. Peace can speak. Peace can leave. Peace can say no. Peace can grieve. Peace can acknowledge injustice. Peace can make difficult decisions. What makes it peace is not the absence of action. It is the absence of hatred within the action. This is where love becomes something much deeper than an emotion. Love becomes the state from which you choose to see. The ego asks, how can I protect myself from life? Love asks, how can I remain connected to who I truly am while life unfolds? Fear closes. Love remains receptive. Fear demands certainty. Love allows mystery. Fear says control everything. Love whispers, listen. And silence is where that whisper becomes easier to hear. You may discover that many of the answers you have been chasing cannot be found through more thinking. There are moments when thinking is useful, of course. The mind is a beautiful instrument, but an instrument is not meant to play every second of the day. Music requires spaces between notes. Your life does too. Sometimes the answer appears only after you stop demanding one. You may have experienced this without realizing it. You struggled with a decision for days. You analyzed every possibility. You asked everyone you trusted. You made lists in your mind. Still, nothing felt clear. Then one morning you walked outside. The air was quiet. You stopped thinking about the decision for a moment. You noticed the sky or the movement of a tree. And suddenly you knew, not because someone gave you new information. Something simply became clear. Perhaps intuition is sometimes what remains when the noise becomes quiet enough. Perhaps the source does not always communicate through dramatic signs. Perhaps it is present as the gentle knowing beneath your urgency. The ego demands answers loudly. Wisdom often arrives quietly. And the more comfortable you become with silence, the less frightened you become by not knowing. This may be one of the greatest freedoms available to you, to say, I don't know what happens next, and I can still be at peace today. You do not know exactly how every relationship will unfold. You do not know how long the people you love will remain beside you. You do not know what changes are waiting beyond the horizon. You do not know how many seasons remain. And perhaps you were never meant to know. A river does not need a map of the entire landscape before it moves toward the ocean. It meets each curve when the curve arrives. It moves around stones. It widens. It narrows. Sometimes it moves quickly, sometimes slowly, yet it continues because flowing is its nature. Perhaps your task is not to control the entire river. Perhaps it is to stop fighting the water. Silence gradually teaches you this kind of trust. Not blind trust that nothing painful will ever happen. Life contains loss. It contains endings. It contains moments that will ask more of your heart than you thought you could give. The trust is deeper than that. It is the sense that whatever arrives, there is a presence within you that can meet it. You have already met days you once thought you could not survive. You have already walked through endings. You have already changed in ways your younger self could never have predicted. And something within you remained. That something is what silence keeps inviting you to remember. So when the ego begins speaking loudly again, you do not need to destroy it. You can almost smile at its fear. There is the part of me that wants certainty. There is the part of me that wants approval. There is the part of me that wants to control another person's opinion. There is the part of me comparing my season with someone else's. You notice, you breathe, you return, and every return makes the inner doorway a little more familiar. Eventually, silence stops feeling like a place where you are alone. It begins feeling like a place where you are finally accompanied by your deepest self. And from that place, another possibility begins to emerge. If you are not your fear, if you are not your resentment, if you are not the expectations placed upon you, if you are not even the endless stories the mind tells about who you should be, then who are you beneath all of it? Perhaps that is the question silence has been waiting to answer. Not with words, but with remembrance. And perhaps remembrance is exactly what begins when you stop trying so hard to become someone else. For much of your life, you may have been given the impression that spiritual growth means adding something to yourself. More wisdom, more discipline, more knowledge, more certainty, a better personality, a more peaceful identity. But what if the deepest transformation is not an addition at all? What if it is a gentle releasing of everything that has covered what was already there? A window does not create sunlight. It simply allows the light to enter when what blocks it is removed. In the same way, silence does not manufacture love, peace, or wholeness within you. It begins clearing the window. You start seeing the fingerprints of fear, the dust of resentment, the old judgments, the expectations you inherited, the stories you have repeated so many times that they began to feel like truth. And as you notice them without condemning yourself, something begins to soften. This is where forgiveness becomes such a powerful part of returning to yourself. There may be someone whose name still changes the feeling inside your body. Years may have passed, yet when you remember what happened, something tightens. Perhaps you imagine conversations with this person. You tell them everything you wish you had said. You imagine them finally understanding how deeply they hurt you. There is nothing unusual about this. The mind often returns to unfinished pain because it wants resolution. It wants the past to become different. But silence slowly reveals something that thinking cannot accomplish. You cannot change yesterday. You can only change the relationship you have with yesterday now. Perhaps someone betrayed your trust. Maybe you loved them sincerely and discovered that they did not protect your heart the way you hoped they would. For a long time, anger may have seemed necessary. It gave you strength. It protected you from vulnerability. It reminded you never to let something similar happen again. Then one day you notice that the person is no longer standing in front of you, but the conversation with them continues inside you. They have left the room, yet you are still arguing. This realization is not meant to shame you. It is an invitation. You can ask yourself quietly, how long do I want to continue giving this moment of my life to something that happened years ago? Forgiveness may begin there, not as a declaration that the other person was right, not as permission for them to return, not as denial of what you suffered. Forgiveness can simply mean that you are no longer willing to poison the present in an attempt to punish the past. You release the demand that yesterday becomes something it cannot become, and something inside you becomes lighter. Sometimes the person you most need to forgive is yourself. This can be harder. You remember the choice you made when you knew less than you know now. You remember staying too long, leaving too soon, trusting someone, hurting someone, ignoring your intuition, missing an opportunity, speaking words you wish you could retrieve. The ego takes these memories and turns them into evidence. See? This is who you are. But awareness sees differently. Awareness recognizes that the person who made that choice was operating from the consciousness available at that moment. Would you ask a seed why it was not already a tree? Would you stand beside a flower in early spring and accuse it of not blooming in winter? Then perhaps you can offer the same patience to your own becoming. You did not always know what you know today. And even today, you do not know what you may understand 10 years from now. This is part of being human. Silence can become a place where you stop putting yourself on trial. You sit with the younger version of yourself, not as a judge, but as someone capable of compassion. Perhaps you can quietly say, I understand why you were afraid. I understand why you wanted to be loved. I understand why you made that choice. I release you. And then there is nothing more to argue about. This does not erase responsibility. In fact, genuine awareness may make responsibility clearer. If you harmed someone, you can acknowledge it. If an apology is appropriate, you can offer one. If something in your behavior needs to change, you can change it. But guilt that awakens love is different from shame that becomes identity. One says, I can choose differently. The other says, I am unworthy. Silence helps you hear the difference. And as forgiveness creates more room inside you, surrender begins to become possible. Surrender is often misunderstood. It can sound like giving up. But spiritual surrender is not abandoning your life. It is abandoning the exhausting belief that you must control every detail of life before you can trust it. You may have been holding tightly to an outcome. A relationship must work. A particular door must open. A person must choose you. Your child must make the decision you believe is best. Your future must resemble the picture in your mind. There is nothing wrong with having preferences. Intention is a beautiful part of being alive. You can move toward what feels meaningful. You can create. You can choose. You can care deeply. But intention and attachment are not the same. Intention says, this is what my heart is moving toward. Attachment says, this must happen or I cannot be at peace. One moves with life. The other tries to negotiate with life. Consider a gardener planting a seed. The gardener can prepare the soil, provide water, offer sunlight, remove weeds, and protect the young plant. But the gardener cannot open the seed with their fingers and force the flower to appear. Trying would destroy what they were hoping to grow. There comes a point where the gardener must trust the intelligence within the seed. Perhaps there are places in your life where you have done everything you can do. You have spoken honestly. You have loved sincerely. You have made the decision available to you. You have planted the seed. Now you keep digging it up every morning to see whether it has grown. Silence whispers, let it be. There is wisdom in knowing when to act and wisdom in knowing when to allow. When you begin trusting this rhythm, you may notice how often life has moved you through doors you would never have chosen. Perhaps something ended that you desperately wanted to keep. At the time you called it failure. Years later, you could see how that ending redirected you towards something you could not have imagined. Perhaps a relationship disappeared and created space for you to finally meet yourself. Perhaps a plan collapsed and forced you to discover a strength you did not know you carried. Perhaps a period of loneliness became the first time you truly listened inwardly. This does not mean every painful event was secretly pleasant or that suffering should be romanticized. Pain is pain. But sometimes meaning becomes visible only after you stop demanding that life explain itself immediately. A tree in autumn does not understand spring. It simply releases its leaves. There are seasons in your life when your deepest spiritual work may be similar. Release the version of yourself you have outgrown. Release the relationship that exists only in memory. Release the need to be understood by everyone. Release the argument you keep rehearsing. Release the expectation that your life should look like someone else's. Release the belief that uncertainty means something is wrong. You do not have to release everything at once. Letting go is rarely a single dramatic moment. Sometimes you release the same thing 100 times. A memory returns. You notice it. You soften. You release again. This is not failure. It is practice. The ocean does not become impatient because another wave arrives. It receives each one. You can learn to receive yourself this way. And as you do, love begins to change meaning. For many people, love begins as something they hope to receive from outside themselves. They search for the person who will make them feel complete, the friend who will never disappoint them, the family member who will finally understand them. But when you enter silence deeply enough, you may begin sensing that love is not merely something another person gives you. Love is also something you are capable of becoming available to. It is already moving within you. You see it when you look at someone who is struggling and feel compassion. You see it when you forgive. You see it when you stop judging yourself. You see it when you choose not to return cruelty with cruelty. You see it when you sit beside someone in grief without trying to fix them. You see it when you appreciate a simple morning without needing it to become anything else. Perhaps love is one of the ways the source expresses itself through you. If so, then your task is not to manufacture love. It is to stop blocking it. Fear blocks it when fear insists on separation. Judgment blocks it when judgment reduces another person to one action. Resentment blocks it when resentment makes the past more important than the present. The need to be right blocks it when being right becomes more important than being at peace. Silence allows you to see these barriers. Then you can ask yourself a question that changes many situations. What would love see here? This does not mean what would weakness do. Love can be strong. Love can recognize deception. Love can create boundaries. Love can leave a destructive situation. But love does not need hatred in order to be clear. Imagine someone criticizes you unfairly. The immediate impulse may be to defend your identity. But in silence, you might notice something else. Perhaps their words come from their own fear. Perhaps they are seeing you through the lens of their own wounds. You do not have to accept their judgment as truth. You also do not have to turn them into an enemy. You can let their perception belong to them. There is extraordinary freedom in this. Not everyone will understand you. Not everyone will approve of your choices. Not everyone will recognize your intentions. And perhaps they do not need to. When you know yourself only through other people's eyes, you become a prisoner of every opinion. When you begin knowing yourself in silence, approval becomes pleasant but no longer necessary. You can listen to feedback without surrendering your identity to it. You can be misunderstood without immediately abandoning your peace. This is not indifference. It is inner alignment. And alignment has very little to do with making life perfect. It means allowing your thoughts, choices, and actions to arise more often from the qualities you wish to embody. If you say you value peace, can peace participate in the way you speak? If you value love, can love participate in the way you see yourself? If you value forgiveness, can forgiveness enter the memories you continue carrying? If you value trust, can you allow some part of tomorrow to remain unknown? These questions are not tests. They are invitations. You will forget sometimes. You will react. You will become impatient. Someone will touch an old wound and the old response will appear before awareness has time to enter. Then perhaps the spiritual practice is not to condemn yourself for forgetting. It is simply to remember again. Return. Return to the breath. Return to awareness. Return to silence. Return to love. You may begin to see that your entire spiritual journey is made of these returns. You leave yourself through fear, and you return. You leave yourself through resentment, and you return. You leave yourself through comparison, and you return. You leave yourself by trying to control what cannot be controlled, and you return. Each return becomes easier because the path becomes familiar. Eventually, silence begins traveling with you. You do not need a special room. You do not need perfect circumstances. You can find a moment of silence before answering a difficult question. You can find it while standing in line. You can find it when someone you love is upset. You can find it in the moment before judgment becomes speech. You can find it when anxiety wakes you at night. You place your attention on your breath and remember, I am here. The mind may continue talking. Let it talk. Silence does not require the absence of thought. It requires that you stop allowing every thought to become your master. Think again of the sky. Birds can cross it. Storms can cross it. Airplanes can cross it. Darkness can cover it. Yet nothing leaves a permanent wound in the sky. Perhaps awareness has something of this quality. Your experiences move through you, but they do not have to define the deepest part of you. Even grief can be held within this larger awareness. If you have lost someone you love, silence may initially feel painful because their absence becomes more noticeable there. You remember their voice, their laughter, the small things you assume would always be available. There may be no spiritual idea that removes this ache, nor should there be. Love grieves because love mattered. But perhaps silence can hold grief without demanding that grief disappear. You can sit beside your sorrow the way you would sit beside someone you love. No fixing, no rushing, no asking when it will end. And slowly, grief may begin revealing something beneath its pain. Gratitude. You hurt because something beautiful touched your life. The form is gone, but the love you experienced has become part of you. Perhaps this is another way silence transforms suffering. It does not always remove what hurts. Sometimes it expands your heart until the pain and the gratitude can exist together. This is the mystery of inner peace. Peace is not a life without sadness. It is a space large enough to hold sadness without losing yourself. Peace is not certainty about tomorrow. It is trust while tomorrow remains unknown. Peace is not being loved by everyone. It is remembering that your capacity to love does not disappear when someone rejects you. And peace is not escaping life. It is meeting life without continuously abandoning the quiet center within yourself. From that center, gratitude begins to arise naturally. Not forced gratitude, not pretending that everything is wonderful. A simpler gratitude. You notice the warmth of sunlight entering a room, the sound of rain, someone's hand in yours, the fact that your breath has been arriving all day without your instruction. You realize how much of life you once overlooked while waiting for something more important to happen. But this is life, this ordinary moment, this breath, this cup of tea, this conversation, this evening sky, this heartbeat, and perhaps the source has never been somewhere far away, waiting for you to become spiritual enough to reach it. Perhaps the sacred has been hiding in the ordinary because your mind was too busy looking elsewhere. Silence returns you to the ordinary, and suddenly the ordinary becomes extraordinary. You begin to understand that purpose may not always be a grand mission waiting somewhere in the future. Purpose may also be the quality of presence you bring to what is already in front of you. How do you listen to the person beside you? How do you treat yourself when you make a mistake? How do you respond when someone disappoints you? Can you bring love into a room where fear has been speaking? Can you bring awareness into a moment that would once have become an argument? Can you bring forgiveness into an old memory? Can you bring trust into an uncertain morning? These small moments shape an inner life. And from that inner life, your outer choices begin to change naturally. You do not force transformation. You become aligned with it. Like a compass returning to north, something within you begins pointing home. And home is not a location. It is the place within you where nothing needs to be proven. The place where you no longer need yesterday to change. The place where tomorrow can remain unknown. The place where love is stronger than the story fear is telling. The place where you can hear the quiet intelligence of your own being. You may call that place your true self. You may call it spirit. You may call it the source. But perhaps what matters most is that you recognize it. Because once you recognize that inner stillness, even for a moment, you begin understanding something you may have spent your whole life searching for. You were never truly separated from peace. You were simply listening to so much noise that you could no longer hear it. And now, as the noise begins to soften, you do not discover a new person waiting underneath. You discover yourself. The self before fear told you who you had to become. The self before resentment taught you what you had to carry. The self before comparison convinced you that your life was somehow behind. The self that can forgive, the self that can trust, the self that can love without possessing, the self that can move with life rather than fighting every turn in the river. And once you begin remembering this self, the question naturally changes. It is no longer, how can I find silence? It becomes, how can I live from this silence when I return to the world? Because eventually the phone will ring again. Someone will disagree with you. Plans will change. Fear will visit. Life will become noisy. And this is where the deepest practice begins. Learning to carry the stillness you discovered in silence into everything that comes next. And this is where silence becomes more than a quiet moment you visit from time to time. It begins becoming a way of meeting your life. The world may not become quieter. People may still misunderstand you. Plans may still change. There will still be mornings when uncertainty arrives before you have even left your bed. There will still be relationships that challenge you, memories that return unexpectedly, and moments when the future seems hidden from view. But something within you can be different. You begin to understand that you do not need a silent world in order to have a silent center. Perhaps this is one of the simplest ways to bring this awareness into your ordinary day. Before reaching for the phone in the morning, give yourself a few moments of stillness. Nothing complicated is required. You do not have to achieve a particular state of mind. You can simply notice your breath and recognize that before the responsibilities, messages, memories, and expectations arrive, you are already here. For a few moments, there is nothing to become. You can quietly ask, what do I want to bring into this day? Not, what must I accomplish? Not, how can I control what happens? But what quality do I want to bring? Perhaps peace, perhaps patience, perhaps compassion, perhaps trust. This is intention in its gentlest form. You are not trying to force life to follow your plans. You are choosing the inner place from which you wish to meet whatever life brings. And then you go into your day. You may forget. Someone says something that irritates you, and you react. Traffic tests your patience. An old fear returns. You compare yourself with someone. You begin worrying about something that has not happened. When you notice this, there is no need to judge yourself. Simply return. One conscious breath can become a doorway. You may silently recognize, I have left the present moment, and then come back, again and again. This returning is not evidence that you are failing. It is the practice itself. You can also create small spaces of silence throughout your day. Perhaps you sit for a few minutes without entertainment. Perhaps you walk without filling your ears with sound. Perhaps you look out a window and allow yourself to see without naming everything you see. You may be surprised by what becomes visible when you stop rushing past your own life. A tree moving in the wind, light falling across the floor, the face of someone you love, the simple miracle of breathing without having to remember how. Gratitude often begins here, not as an obligation to feel thankful for everything that happens, but as an awakening to what has been quietly present while your attention was somewhere else. And when resentment appears, silence can become a place of forgiveness. You do not need to force yourself to forgive before you are ready. You can begin simply by noticing what carrying the resentment is doing inside you. Ask gently, do I still want to carry this? Perhaps today the answer is yes. That is all right. Then ask again another day. Eventually, you may discover that releasing the wound does not betray the person you once were. It honors the person you are becoming capable of remembering. You put down the stone. Your hands become free. And perhaps you use those hands to hold something more beautiful. When uncertainty appears, return to trust. You do not have to convince yourself that everything will happen exactly as you want. That is not trust. That is another attempt at control. Trust can be much quieter. I do not know what happens next, but I am willing to meet it when it arrives. There is freedom in that sentence. The river does not know every turn before it reaches it. The tree does not know which branches will survive every storm. The seed beneath the earth cannot see the sunlight toward which it is growing. And still, life moves. Perhaps you can move with it. There may be days when you feel deeply connected to this truth, and days when you forget everything. On those days, remember that spiritual awakening does not have to mean remaining permanently above ordinary human emotion. You are allowed to be tired. You are allowed to grieve. You are allowed to feel afraid. You are allowed to have moments when your mind becomes noisy again. The invitation is simply not to build your home there. Feel what comes. Listen, allow, and return. Return to the awareness that can hold the feeling without becoming the feeling. Return to the love that does not require perfection. Return to the source that was never truly absent. Perhaps at night, before sleep, you can give yourself another moment of silence. Instead of putting the entire day on trial, let it go. The conversation you wish had gone differently, let it go. The mistake you made, learn from it and let it go. The person who disappointed you, release them from your mind for the night. The uncertainty about tomorrow will arrive when it arrives. For now, breathe. You have carried enough for one day. And perhaps, before closing your eyes, find one simple thing for which you are grateful. Not because gratitude guarantees that tomorrow will be easy, but because gratitude reminds you that even an imperfect day contains something sacred. A smile, a meal, a moment of sunlight, a conversation, a breath. The fact that you are here to experience it. Over time, these quiet returns begin changing your relationship with life. You become less interested in winning every argument and more interested in protecting the peace within you. You become less concerned with being understood by everyone and more willing to understand yourself. You stop asking other people to provide the worth that silence has already shown you cannot be taken away. You begin forgiving because you understand that resentment is too expensive a price for yesterday. You begin releasing control because you recognize that life was never yours to command. And slowly, perhaps without even noticing when it happened, you become lighter. Not because you have acquired something new, because you are carrying less. Less judgment, less comparison, less resistance, less attachment to how everything must unfold. And beneath everything you release, something familiar remains. You, not the identity you have spent years protecting. Not the story of everything that happened to you. Not the collection of other people's opinions. The quiet awareness beneath all of it. This is why silence was never really asking you to escape the world. It was preparing you to return to the world without losing yourself in it. You can walk into noise and remember stillness. You can encounter anger and choose not to become anger. You can face uncertainty without abandoning trust. You can experience loss without losing your capacity for love. You can be misunderstood without forgetting who you are. And you can stand in the middle of a changing life while remaining connected to something within you that does not need the world to stop changing. So perhaps, when everything feels too loud again, you will remember this. You do not always need another answer. You do not always need another opinion. You do not always need to solve the entire future tonight. Sometimes you simply need to become quiet enough to hear what has been underneath the noise all along. Immerse yourself in silence. Not to disappear from life, but to return to it. Return to the breath. Return to forgiveness. Return to gratitude. Return to love. Return to the source within you. And remember that the peace you have spent so much of your life searching for may never have been somewhere ahead of you. Perhaps it has been quietly waiting beneath everything you thought you had to become. You do not need to create it. You do not need to deserve it. You only need moments when you become still enough to recognize it. And when you recognize it, stay there for a little while. Listen, breathe, allow yourself to be exactly where you are. Then carry a little of that silence with you when you rise. If something in this reflection touched a quiet place within you, you are welcome to share what you discovered in the comments. Sometimes one person's reflection becomes the reminder another person needed. And if you would like to continue exploring inner peace, awareness, forgiveness, and the deeper wisdom already present within you, you can subscribe and return for another journey. Until then, whenever the world becomes loud, remember that you have somewhere to return. Not somewhere far away, somewhere within. The silence is still there. The peace is still there. And beneath all the stories, all the fear, all the searching, and all the noise, so are you.